The Allman Brothers' Live at Fillmore East, released in 1971, is often regarded as the greatest live album of all time. A smoking display of musicianship, particularly the guitar interplay between Duane Allman and Dickey Betts, Gregg Allman's soulful vocals, and a most unique rhythm section with bassist Berry Oakley and not one, but two drummers, Butch Truck and Jaimoe. It's a double album combining genres like blues, rock and roll, and even jazz. So is it the greatest live album ever made? I mean, even at the time, it had some stiff competition. The second disc of Cream's Wheels of Fire was recorded live, Jimi Hendrix's Band of Gypsys album was also recorded live at the Fillmore East, and The Who's Live at Leeds, released 1 year earlier, is another candidate for greatest live album. I've highlighted a lot of these tracks in my JTC playlist series. But for me personally, not only do I consider the Allman Brothers' Live at Fillmore East arguably the greatest live album ever produced, it's one of my favorite albums, period. So I got this on CD when I was going into high school, which my friend lost, and I must have spent countless hours at home learning every guitar lick off this record, because I didn't actually have any friends to hang out with. They just wanted my CD. And to this day, I would cite Duane Allman as one of my greatest influences as a guitar player. Duane had already garnered respect for his work as a session player. He played the guitar solo on Wilson Pickett's rendition of Hey Jude, the slide guitar in Aretha Franklin's version of The Weight, performed with King Curtis many times, no relation, and most notably performed with Eric Clapton on Derek and the Dominoes' Layla album. That's another masterpiece I gotta cover sometime. His brother Gregg and him had attempted a couple projects, but it wouldn't be until 1969 when Duane recruited Berry Oakley and Dickey Betts from the band's Second Coming. I gotta say, that is a great name for a band, and I'm not even a religious man, along with drummers Butch Truck and J. Jahani Johnson, better known as Jaimoe. They weren't the first band to use two drummers. In fact, Duane wanted two because James Brown had two and Otis Redding had two. Jaimoe had actually worked with Otis Redding. But the Allman Brothers certainly popularized the idea, and with the unit formed, they released their first self-titled album in 1969, complete with a nude photo of the band, and featured the Gregg Allman pen numbers Not My Cross to Bear, Dreams, not to be confused with the Fleetwood Mac song, and a 5-minute rendition of Whipping Post. We'll talk about that song later. I gotta say, it's a strong showing for their debut record. You can already hear their chemistry, but it was a slow seller. So they put together a very rigorous touring schedule, and thankfully word started to spread about this powerful blues rock outfit. Their shows included residencies at Bill Graham's venues, including the Fillmore East in New York City.
Out of Macon, Georgia, let's welcome please the Allman Brothers.
In 1970, they released their sophomore album, Idlewild South, with Gregg penning more classics like Midnight Rider and Please Call Home, but also Dickey Betts contributing the song's revival and the instrumental In Memory of Elizabeth Reed. Again, we'll discuss that later.
We did a lot of jamming, and somebody would come up with a line, whether it be Berry or myself or Duane. We would just play it over and over until we developed it, and then when we got something that was close, then we'd go ahead and refine it and work it out note for note.
This time, legendary producer Tom Dowd was behind the console at the same time he and Duane were working on the Layla album. I actually have both these albums on this double LP called Beginnings, which I would consider a goldfish in and of itself. But still, it seemed like the magic of their live performances, where they could stretch way beyond the 3-minute single mark, just couldn't be recaptured in the studio. So Duane decided that their third LP would be a live album.
We get kind of frustrated during the records, and I think consequently our next album will be, for the most part, a lot of live recording, man, to get some of that natural fire and stuff on it.
And from March 11th to 13th, the Allman Brothers played a run of shows at the Fillmore East. Though you might be surprised to learn that the band is not standing outside the Fillmore East on the cover, this was actually taken in an alleyway in Macon, Georgia, which I've been to. The story goes that after a few photos where the band looked sour, Duane spotted a dealer friend, bought some coke, and safely hid it in his hands, which was followed by laughter from the rest of the band, resulting in the picture that you see. On the back cover was their road crew, meant as a kind of thank you, especially since they stacked up all their gear like this. Which I've always found really cool, that they were in solidarity with everyone who helped make these shows happen. And in Duane's own words, "Hey man, they work just as effing hard as we do." Interesting to note that tour manager Twiggs Lyndon is superimposed on the wall because he was in jail for stabbing and killing a promoter for not paying the band in 1970. Yeah, Gregg talked about it in his book, and it's a pretty insane story. Maybe I'll cover it in a separate video. Fortunately, the band and most of the road crew were able to walk away from that incident unscathed and stay out of jail long enough to paint their masterpiece. Anyway, let's jump into the record. With a short introduction by Michael Ahern, the band launches right into a cover of Blind Willie McTell's Statesboro Blues, a staple of their live shows, and curiously enough, the song that inspired Duane to pick up slide, specifically listening to the Taj Mahal version from 1968.
He'd been listening to Jesse Ed Davis play for Taj Mahal. He's just already killing it, you know?
On the Fillmore rendition, right out of the gate, Duane and Dickey's guitars just hit you in the face, almost sounding like horns. This is really where Duane's R&B influence comes in. And Duane's bottleneck slide solo, I mean, what can I say? His open E slide guitar is iconic. How he brought this Delta blues slide playing into the rock realm is what he's known best for. The tone, the touch, the drive on his amp, it is still untouchable to this day. And if that weren't enough, Gregg's vocals are just so authentic. He doesn't oversing like a lot of rock blues guys did at the time, but it's no less soulful. Dickey plays a guitar solo, and despite him and Duane having similar influences, you can hear the difference in his tone and approach coming more from a country and western background.
We got both kinds. We got country and western.
Dickey tends to have more bite to his picking, while Duane's tone is a bit rounder. It's still no less inventive, and he often incorporates this very unique vibrato by shaking the string. But really, the whole band is cooking here. Blues shuffles can get a little monotonous and repetitive at times, but when they're done right, not to mention incorporating these R&B synchronized hits, they hit you hard, and Statesboro Blues is just as soulful as any of the blues originators. So this particular take was captured from their first show on March 13th.
We were supposed to be special guests to Johnny Winter. After the first show, the first night, half the audience left after we played, so we got moved to headline the next one.
Thanks to the Fillmore East recordings box set, I've been able to hear everything recorded and decipher how they put these takes together. Although curiously, the first night on March 11th is not included, and I've never been able to find a live recording of it. The reason is because Duane had invited a horn section to sit in with them, and according to Tom Dowd, they weren't very good. So much so that Tom insisted Duane pull the horn players after the first show, which Duane relented. Although sax player Juicy Carter did stay on for the next couple shows. And I can see why Tom didn't use any takes with him. He's very out of tune, and doesn't seem to add much to the music outside of some mediocre soloing. I'm surprised Duane didn't invite King Curtis, now that would have made for an epic jam. But there was a seventh member sitting in, harmonica player Ace Doucette, who had been featured on the previous record, and fortunately he's featured here as well. The second track, Done Somebody Wrong, is an Elmore James cover, this version taken from the second show on March 12th. Again, Duane's slide is masterful, Gregg's vocal is on fire, Dickey's solo is equally tasteful, and Ace plays a damn good harmonica solo to complement the guitar gods. The third blues cover on side 1 is the T-Bone Walker staple Stormy Monday, a classic slow blues that's been covered many times, but this may very well be the most popular version. It's one of Gregg Allman's finest vocal performances. The subtlety of his voice really taps into the emotion of the song, like the long week has really run him down. He even gets a short solo on his B3 organ where the time changes from a slow blues to a jazzy waltz. Once again, Duane and Dickey's solos are masterful. Though curiously, Ace played a harmonica solo which was edited out of the original album, which might have been the right call. It's a lot of slow blues to take in all at once. Still, side 1 really is just a solid run of blues performances, among the best. But side 2 is where the Allmans start to venture into more experimental territory. You Don't Love Me is a Willie Cobbs song, the Allmans basing their rendition off of Junior Wells' cover, only their version takes up the entire side 2 and is 19 minutes long. You know, growing up in the 90s at a time when Blink-182 and Britney Spears were popular, seeing lengths like 19 minutes really got me thinking, how the hell does that work? Well, it's really a collection of several different interludes. The first 7 minutes is a smokin' blues jam, taken from their first show on the 13th, and then in a pretty seamless cut, we joined them on the second show of the 12th, where Duane trails off on a solo guitar venture sans time. kinda similar to Jimmy Page's solo from Heartbreaker. It really shows off the dynamics of his playing, just the slightest hint of feedback to add tension. Then Dickey jams with the drummers, and this may actually be his most technically proficient work, showing off virtuosic country licks and sounding straight up like Speedmaster Alvin Lee at times. From there, we come to a shuffle and we get our first taste of those iconic guitar harmonies the Allmans are known for. And honestly, it sounds like they're just coming up with it on the spot.
On the Fillmore East album, there's a lot of things on there that are played in harmony and different chord changes. We never played them before or after that, so a lot of it was spontaneous.
And listening to all these recordings, they never play this section the same way. In fact, from their first show on the 12th, Duane and Dickey trade guitar solos, which is pretty cool to listen to. Around the 16-minute mark, Duane launches into another lone solo, and someone in the audience yells out, This has become so famous among fan circles of the band, and is something that can really only be captured in a live performance. I don't know if this is a heckle or a shout of encouragement, but Duane seems so undeterred by this and just keeps moving. Even when the audience starts clapping along, he's not even paying attention to them and comes to this powerful coda where he quotes "Joy to the World." And to tease you even more, just as the song finishes, you hear the opening to Whipping Post fade out. This is only the first disc, and we're really just getting started. So after each show, the Allmans and Tom Dowd would go to Atlantic Studios and listen to the tapes.
I took the entire band in taxi cabs up to the Atlantic studio. Then we started editing. We don't need to do this song tomorrow, let's change the set.
And we just took the best from each night and put it together.
They really wanted to make sure they didn't need to overdub anything, or it wouldn't have been a real live recording. It's probably why so many of these takes come from the March 13th shows. They got rid of the horns, they laser focused on what they needed to work on, and man did they capture some of the greatest live performances here. Despite the second show being delayed due to someone calling in a bomb scare. According to Randy Poe's book, Skydog, they had to search and clear the Fillmore. Maybe the band's performance was so explosive somebody really did think a bomb was going off. Or more likely, they were just having a really bad trip. Whatever the reason, when they start the next set, Duane says, "Good morning." And a track from the final set kicks off the second disc, a new song credited to all members of the Allman Brothers Band called Hot Lanta. Top 3 Allman tracks for me easily. My band even used to cover it back in high school. A 6/8 jam kicking off with Gregg's organ, we get some of my favorite harmonized guitar lines, some of which really seem to have Dickey Betts' fingerprints all over them with their chromatic movements. It's well documented that the brothers were heavily influenced by Miles Davis and John Coltrane, mostly introduced to them through Jaimoe.
Miles Davis does the best job, man, to me, of portraying the innermost, subtlest, softest feelings in the human psyche, man.
Duane admitted to having worn out his copy of Miles Davis's Kind of Blue, which I've mentioned before having influenced Rick Wright of Pink Floyd. I remember when I was really getting into Fillmore East, I finally listened to Coltrane's My Favorite Things, and the 6/8 influence made so much sense. Again, the solos are all top-notch, but this time we get a drum duet between Butch Trucks and Jaimoe. You can really hear the different influence of each of them, Butch coming more from the rock world, while Jaimoe incorporates more jazz fills. When the song comes to a close, we hear the haunting rumbling of Butch's timpani, coming to an almost orchestral climax. The audience waits in dead silence before erupting in applause, knowing they've just witnessed an epic performance. And that's the short one. Duane introduces the next number as a song Dickey Betts wrote for their second album, Memory of Elizabeth Reed. And again, what can be said? The story goes that Dickey and his girlfriend used to meet each other in a graveyard, supposedly for some lovin', near a tombstone that really did say, "In memory of Elizabeth Reed." I don't know how that would possibly put me in the mood, but it does make for a sublimely haunting song. And while the studio cut from Idlewild South is good, there's no denying that this live cut is the definitive version. From the soft touch of Dickey's opening volume swells, to the unison-turned harmonized guitar lines played by Duane, Dickey, and Berry Oakley on bass. Not to mention, this is a pretty funky jam, and having Butch and Jaimoe playing off of each other makes for such a quirky groove with unique accents, and Berry gets a chance to throw in many bass fills. The solos played by Dickey, Gregg, and Duane, in that order, each have their own flavor, and whoever's comping behind them really adds to that. Dickey's solo relies on some unique melodicism and dissonance. Gregg's B3 solo is very gospel in its approach. And Duane's solo really relies on dynamics. And that's the key to these solos and what separates Duane from other jam band guitar players. Just when he's reached this pinnacle of godlike guitar licks, he'll come down, and the band will come down with him. And it's like you get a minute to just take a deep breath before rocking out again. You'll even notice when they come back to the main line how much faster it is, but it's been a dynamic increase of speed over this piece. You know, as much as everyone refers to the Allman Brothers as Southern rock, a term that honestly they were never that comfortable with, this really feels more like fusion jazz to me. I don't think you can really compare the Allman Brothers to Lynyrd Skynyrd or the Charlie Daniels Band. They really were their own unique entity. And now comes the 23-minute opus, Whipping Post. Taken from the first album, and according to Gregg, it came to him at night, and he had to write the whole thing down on an ironing board cover, not wanting to wake a baby by turning the lights on. And apparently that opening bass riff in 11/8 was Berry's invention. The way it builds to another 6/8 groove, instrument by instrument, is pure fire. It's also nice to hear Gregg's vocals again. By this point in the record, we haven't heard his voice for 2 songs and a good portion of You Don't Love Me. He is definitely drawing from a past relationship, and no, it's not Cher, she came in later. Still, this song's right at home with any of the blues classics.
I feel like I'm dying.
More classic guitar harmony and a counterpoint from Gregg's B3 leads to honestly one of my all-time favorite guitar solos ever by Duane Allman. I go back and forth between this and Lizzie Reed as my favorite Duane Allman solo, even Dreams from the first album, but on Whipping Post, every single note coming out of his guitar, all on that repeating 3-chord vamp in 6/8, is up there with Miles Davis's classic solos. There have been a lot of classic guitar solos in 4/4, but here, the odd time allows for Duane to explore some different phrasing and patterns, sometimes playing 4/4 against it. It's so in tune with the emotion of Gregg's lyrics, the anger, the pain, but still a sense of resilience. And again, it's the way the band hits those dynamics with him. You know, I was listening to it again just now, and I've never noticed this before, but right around the 3:20 mark, just as Duane's solo decrescendos, Berry's bass almost completely drops out, really allowing the listener to feel these changes in dynamics. It really just shows you how in tune all these players were. I could talk about Duane's solo forever, but trust me when I say it really is one of the greatest guitar solos in rock history. Of course, we can't leave out Dickey Betts, whose solo is a whole adventure unto itself, crashing in the middle of the song and going into completely different musical sections. I mean, this is why the song is 23 minutes long. It's exploring more improvisation as a unit. Dickey even quotes Damn Frere Jacques later on. And the way they all come back to the head still sends a chill down my spine. And we're still not done yet. Duane Allman's final solo, Sans Time, is straight up haunting. In retrospect, we know his time on this world is short, and this will end up being the final Allman Brothers song released in his lifetime. It's hard not to hear this musical passage as some prophetic statement, especially with Butch's timpani and Gregg's low organ notes behind him. But man, is this sublime. And Gregg's soulful vocals, echoed by his brother's guitar, is so moving. The band comes to a crashing symphonic climax, and the record comes to an end. Or does it? As it fades out, you can hear a happier rendition of Mountain Jam teased on Duane's guitar, almost a little tease of what's to come. And well, that's the Allman Brothers live at Fillmore East. Honestly, I was getting chills just writing the copy for this video. And I can't imagine what it would have been like in the audience for that show. After the band finished, the crowd kept yelling for more until it was 6 o'clock in the morning, and Duane told them,
We recorded all this. This is going to be our third album, and thank you for your support. You're all on it. We ain't going to send you no check, but thanks for your help.
I mean, I would have wanted a check. Now, although Tom Dowd made some quick mixes before they set back out on the road, it was wisely decided to wait until July to release it when they were starting a new tour, so they'd have something to promote. There was a bit of a power struggle with the label, feeling it should have been cut down to a single album with all the jamming, but executive Phil Walden decided to release this double LP for the price of a single LP. It's a misconception that the album became popular after Duane's death. From what I've read, initial sales were solid, and the album started climbing the charts within a matter of days.
We worked very hard for 2 years and built our following, and when that live album came out, that's what everybody was waiting for.
And for listeners to finally have it on vinyl and listen to it at home, it must have been a religious experience in 1971, and an artistic triumph for the band. But as we all know, that excitement wouldn't last. On October 29th, 1971, Duane Allman was killed in a motorcycle accident in Macon, Georgia. He was 24 years old. I still consider it one of the greatest losses in rock history, especially after they had just made this masterpiece. And unlike Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin, Duane never really got to experience his fame. Live at Fillmore East would enter the top 20 within days of his death. And for the rest of the band, they lost their older brother, their mentor, their leader. And if this story couldn't get even more tragic, Berry Oakley died on a motorcycle accident on November 11th, 1972, only a few blocks from where Duane had been killed and was also 24. That is the freakiest story ever. Decades later, despite him surviving several years of drug abuse and Cher, and still releasing and performing great music, Gregg would finally be rejoined with his brother after a battle with liver cancer at the age of 69. In 2017, Butch Trucks committed suicide also at the age of 69. And only recently, on April 18th, 2024, Richard Dickey Betts would die from COPD at the age of 80. Well, at least he made it that far. As of this recording, Jaimoe is the last surviving member of the original Allman Brothers Band. God bless Jaimoe. But following Duane's death, the band would carry on and achieve even greater success. 1972's Eat a Peach, which contrary to popular myth was not named after the wrongly labeled peach truck that caused Duane's accident, hit number 4 on the charts. And wouldn't you know it, everyone got to hear the 33-minute Mountain Jam teased on the Fillmore record, along with a live version of Trouble No More and the classic One Way Out, which was actually cut on the closing night of the Fillmore, June 27, 1971, where the brothers would have the honor to play as the final act, and Bill Graham would refer to them as the best rock and roll band. Even when the Beach Boys demanded they be the closing act of the Fillmore, Bill told them no. Versions of Don't Keep Me Wonderin' and Midnight Rider from these shows would appear on the Duane Allman Anthology discs, and over the years, the entirety of the concerts would slowly be released. I mean, it really says a lot about these concerts that they kept returning to them for their releases, even more so than the biggest album of their career, Brothers and Sisters. And I like that album just fine, thanks in part to Chuck Leavell's piano. But it's just a different band without Duane Allman. It's like listening to Fleetwood Mac without Peter Green. It's still good, but it's not the same band. They'd even attempt another live album, but this one felt more like a standard greatest hits live record. And that's what really separates the Allman Brothers Live at Fillmore East as the greatest live album ever. They could stretch way beyond the confines of their studio recordings from the time. This is the band in their natural element. They really push the limits of these songs where they can really show off their musicianship and the spontaneous interplay between them. A lot of great live recordings like The Who's Leads version of My Generation explore this as well, but the chemistry between these 6 musicians is something that really needs to be experienced. Is it the greatest rock album, period? Well, that's harder to judge. Admittedly, it doesn't have the songwriting of the Beatles' Abbey Road, it's not the conceptual marvel that Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon is, but just as a guitar player and a musician in general, I honestly can't think of something that has inspired my guitar playing or how to interact with other musicians as much as Live at Fillmore East has. To say the Allman Brothers Live at Fillmore East gets a goldfish would be an understatement. And while I'd recommend the entire album, the 23-minute version of Whipping Post is a very important staple of rock and roll. But so is their version of Elizabeth Reed, Hot Lanta, and the classic Statesboro Blues. It's a must-have for your vinyl collection. But what do you think? Do you think it's the greatest live album ever? Or you think it's something else? Comment below, let me know. Please make sure to subscribe and like this video. It really helps this channel a lot. And a huge thank you to all of my patrons. You can follow me on Patreon for extended versions of these videos commercial-free. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.